The rideshare eased off the main road and onto Juniper Lane just as the light turned that pale rinsed color after rain. Harborview always smelled clearer after a storm. Wet bark cut grass, the faint iron of puddles. I had imagined this turn for weeks, the car stopping, the door opening, my hand closing around the familiar latch, lemon oil lifting from the banister, the particular hush of my kitchen when the refrigerator clicks off between breaths. On Saturdays I used to polish those floors until you could see the window panes traveling across them in afternoon squares. It was a habit my hands learned before my mind could name it. Mop, bring, buff, repeat, the room turning brighter under a simple rhythm. I had promised myself that when I came home I would sit on the stool by the stove and simply look, letting the sight collect inside me like warm broth. Instead, the driver rolled to a gentle stop in front of our low fence. The cedar slats were the same, graying beautifully, and the little arch I built with Adam when he was 12 still leaned a degree to the left. But at the gate, the lock winked back a bright circle, a new cylinder slick as a coin. For a second, I thought the wet on my palm was rain. Then I realized my skin had gone damp all by itself. "This is fine," I told the driver, though I had already paid. My cane touched the pavement, tentative. The wind shifted and set the shell chime on the porch, ticking a sound I strung together one winter from broken pieces of sea glass and a length of fishing line. Move, tap, hush. Something inside me matched its rhythm and then tripped over it. "Adam," I called, though the gate was still shut between us. "Jessa." The syllables landed flat as if the air had been arranged not to carry them. I pressed the brass buzzer on the post and felt its familiar vibration under my thumb. The hospital had its own music, soft alarms carts, a voice asking for birthdays, but it was the quiet afterward that kept ringing inside me, as if the silence there had been a kind of glue. A curtain in the front window lifted the smallest margin. I saw a forehead, a flash of hair. The fabric fell back into place with a practiced, noiseless fold. I turned the gate's latch out of memory, forgetting myself for a breath. It didn't give. The keyhole didn't recognize the shape my hand wanted to make. Across the lane, Mrs. Finch paused with her blue recycling bin and tried not to look as if she were looking. Habit made me smile. Women are taught to do that, to set a pleasant expression between themselves and whatever is happening. "I've misplaced my key," I said in a voice that belonged to older afternoons. Rain gets into everything, she offered, as if forgetfulness were a weather pattern. "Do you need—" "It's all right," I said, because it was easier than deciding whether it was. The front door opened, not the gate, not yet, but the house itself. Jessa stood just behind the screen, her hand still on the latch. Her blouse was the kind that doesn't wrinkle even when you wish it would. She didn't look surprised to see me. She looked as if she had been practicing how to appear unruffled. "Miriam," she said, smiling a smile that didn't leave her mouth. "You should get settled somewhere comfortable tonight." Her eyes flicked toward my cane, then back. "We've got contractors in it and out, dust, paint fumes. It's not the best environment." "My room is at the back," I said. "I won't be in anyone's way." The words came out carefully, like carrying a cup and saucer across a crowded room. "Adam's on a call," she replied, the way one mentions a light drizzle. "He'll be finished later." She didn't step forward. The screen stayed between us, as tidy as a lesson. "I'm home." It felt important to say that to someone besides myself. "The timing is just awkward," she said. "Give us a day. Truly, it's for the best. We'll make everything nice." Behind her shoulder down the hall, a shape moved past the side table. Adam. He adjusted a picture frame that didn't need adjusting. His head was bent. The gesture traveled back 20-30 years, boy with a puzzle piece, searching for where it fits before the present slammed softly back into place. If he heard my name, he didn't turn to show it. The shell chime knocked again, 2 soft ticks, like a polite reminder. I could smell time. I planted a little mound of it by the step the spring Adam left for college. The plant had spread resilient and low to the ground, the way stubborn things often are. A sparrow landed on the fence post beside my hand and peered as if judging whether I was a safe ledge. It took one bright hop and flew unbothered by borders that had stopped me. "Please," I said, and I don't think I meant the house so much as the correctness of the afternoon. "I'm tired." "I know," Jessa said, almost tender and completely firm. "Let me help you find a place for tonight. I've already called around." The kind of solution that arrives without having asked what problem it belongs to. The screen door whispered shut, then reopened the smallest degree, like a rehearsal of consideration. "I'll send Adam out after his call," she added. "We'll figure out logistics." The gate stayed shut. The word logistics hung there with the smell of rain and gutters. "Could I just sit on the porch?" I tried to make it sound like an afterthought. 5 minutes. "It's all drop cloths," she said, and the smile, impossible and precise, returned. "You'll be more comfortable somewhere familiar." She closed the inner door with a care that performed kindness. A private performance, after all, still counts as practice. I stayed by the gate until my legs became uncertain. The cane found the crack in the pavement. It always found the one like a fine vein. Puddles held a section of the ash tree upside down, the branches more intricate in reflection than above. I could see my face in the lock's new metal, distorted by curves small enough to fit on the tip of a thumb. Mrs. Finch wheeled her bin away. A car went by slowly, respectful of the standing water. The chime set its 3-note song, moving again. It occurred to me that a house has many voices you can measure a day. By them if you're alone, heater hinge. A drawer that sticks in humidity, then surrenders with a sigh. I could line them up and identify each one with my eyes closed. That knowledge had nowhere to go but back into me. I pressed the buzzer once more and listened for footsteps. None came. The sound of the button traveled into the wood, and I felt it in the tip of my finger after it stopped, a phantom of pressure like a door you keep expecting to open because it has always opened before. I couldn't have said how long I stood there. Long enough for the cloud that had been covering the sun to thin, to lace, for the water on the fence rail to reseed itself into beadlets. A brightness slipped down the street and lifted the color of everything one notch. The time released a greener scent when the light touched it. My breath paid attention to the change before I did. I looked again at the silvered circle in the gate. A lock is just a decision someone made about what counts as inside. That's all metal fashioned into a boundary that pretends to be neutral. My hand rested on the wood next to it, palm flat, like greeting a patient animal. Through the screen, the hallway was quiet. The table with its empty clay bowl where I used to drop my keys, the runner I hemmed one summer when the heat pressed the house into a slow, serious mood. The driver had offered to wait, but I told him no. The lane settled back into itself. Somewhere a washing machine thumped. I tried not to think about the lemon oil bottle under the sink or the remedy of a chair, you know. I tried not to think at all. The afternoon would not return to its planned shape. Under my feet, the street held steady. Above me, the chime kept time with a breeze that didn't mind where it had been. When I finally turned away, it was only to sit on the low wall and let the damp soak through the fabric at the back of my knees. The cane lay across my lap like a quiet sentence. I breathed in time and pavement and the faint trace of paint from somewhere. On the other side of the gate, life continued in its small tasks. Here, it paused long enough for me to recognize the pause. I placed my fingertips on the new lock just once. No pressure, the way you touch a name on a monument. Then I lifted my hand and set it in my own lap where it belonged. By dusk, I'd taken the spare room Mrs. Finch kept for visiting grandchildren, an iron bed, a narrow dresser, a window that looked across to my own eaves. The small refrigerator in the hallway hummed with the same low note as mine used to, and the sound unlatched a door in my head. Memory didn't ask permission, it stepped in and set its bag down. It had started before the hospital, on an afternoon without weather. I was rinsing berries at the sink when I reached for the old bowl with the faint cornflower ring, the one Adam and I bought at a church sale the year he learned long division. The cupboard shelf where it lived held an empty circle of dust. I thought I'd misremembered. I pulled out mixing bowls, pasta bowls, the salad bowl from the neighbor's wedding gift, stacked and restacked. Nothing blue, nothing chipped. Nothing that remembered who I had been when I first learned to cook for a growing boy. Jessa, I called, keeping my voice even. She was at the counter, labeling jars with her small machine, the strip of white tape whispering forward with each press. Basmati, oats, baking soda. She didn't turn. Yes. My bowl, I said. The older one. Where did it wander off to? It didn't, she said, and opened the pantry. On the bottom shelf, upside down, sat a plastic storage tub, hiding something beneath it the way you hide a stain with a magazine. She lifted the tub, and there it was, the cornflower ring, a chip at the rim like a healed bite. Miriam, she said gently, we agreed not to use things that can break badly. That one's sentimental. It's safer if I keep it out of rotation. I looked at the bowl, then at her hands, perfect, efficient hands that never looked flowery. I can be careful, I said. You are careful, she agreed, and sometimes careful isn't enough. She reached for a shallow ramekin and set it on the counter. Try this one, better for portions. It was a bowl made for a sparrow. That week, the meals reorganized themselves as if an app had taken up residence in our kitchen. Ramekins lined up on a tray like ideas in a presentation. My plate was measured by numbers I hadn't been asked to learn. Sodium, sugars, macros whispered as proof. The first night of the new system, Adam held up his phone. The nutritionist says small plates help you feel satisfied, he said, meaning well and not looking me in the face, long enough to discover how I felt. I asked to peel carrots. Jessa tapped the tip of the knife on the board. Tick, tick. We're on a timeline, she said. Sit and rest, please. She said, sit the way you say, down to a dog you love enough to train. I sat. The couch had always been kind. Now it felt like a small fence. From the edge, I watched their shoulders angle toward each other over the stove. They were a team. People like to be a team. The pan hissed. The steam smelled rich, full. On my side table, a square of gelatin trembled under its plastic lid. The changes came cleverly wrapped, safety, efficiency, streamlining. A label maker appeared in the laundry room. I watched my life get reshelved by a thin strip of adhesive seasonal donate unknown. The junk drawer that was never junk to me rubber bands. A ring from a soda pull in 1989. The spare key to a neighbor's pickup went silent overnight. I stood over the drawer and listened to the absence of sound. On Sundays, Jessa began to set the table without asking me which napkins felt like a weekday and which felt like grace. Forks marched in new alignment. The little vase shaped like a pear, the one that let even a weed look like a decision, migrated to the donation box. Less clutter, she said. Air moves better. When friends dropped by, I became a set piece wheeled in at the appropriate point and returned to position after. Miriam's been resting more, Jessa would say. Smile angled like an apology designed to make her sound considerate. Adam would qualify. We're just trying to keep things smooth. He had begun to speak in plural. I had not been invited to the grammar lesson. On a Tuesday, I came in from trimming the thyme, still a small kingdom by the step, and found 2 different trays prepared. One had cloth napkins, 2 polished spoons, a bowl bright with something fragrant. The other waited near the sink, utilitarian and clean, holding a breast of chicken white as a drab cloud and a spoonful of rice that made a sound like paper when my fork touched it. I stood a moment as if I had walked into a stranger's kitchen. The overhead light hummed just above the pitch of a human voice. Adam passed me with a kiss to the air. We ate early, he said already on his way to the email he was writing. That night alone at the counter, I felt the cool of the laminate under my elbows. I chewed without appetite the taste of something absent working its way through. It would have been simpler to decide they were simply busy or kind in a new vocabulary I didn't speak. I tried that. It worked for an hour at a time. The day I fainted wasn't dramatic. I'd been folding towels in the afternoon heat when the room narrowed to a thin corridor, then tipped. Jessa called the nurse line. Adam drove. The hospital smelled like the color white. The ER ceiling had those perforated tiles that make constellations if you stare too long. Someone attached a clip to my finger and the machine translated me into light. Tests became procedures, procedures became consent forms. A doctor with gentle eyebrows explained the surgery as if walking me through a house that needed work you couldn't see from the street. Routine, he said. We'll be careful. He said we, and I believed him. In the days that followed, the hospital learned my name, then forgot it, then learned it again. The chaplain came in by mistake and left a paper crane on the window ledge. A volunteer asked if I wanted a magazine and didn't wait for the answer. Nurses did the real saving from pain, from thirst, from silent rooms that try to convince you you've fallen out of the world. I liked the night nurse, a woman who wore her hair under a blue scarf and spoke to me as if we were already acquainted. She would straighten my sheets and tell me how her son had discovered a frog in the garden and named it Tuesday. She made the air inside the room behave. Jessa visited at intervals that suggested scheduling software. Her tote bag was the kind that stands up on its own. She brought fruit in a clear container and a bouquet of hydrangeas wrapped in crackly paper. Hydrangeas looked like they could quiet a room by being in it. She set them near the sink where their scent could not decide whether to exist. How are we feeling? She asked each time as if speaking on behalf of a small, efficient committee. Like I'm inside a clock, I said once. She smiled not at the image but to acknowledge that I had said a complete sentence. Adam stood by the blind, tracing the slat with a fingertip as if petitioning it. He looked tired in a way that made me want to hand him his childhood, or at least his old flannel shirt. You're doing great, he said, as if my job were to be good at staying still. On the second rainy afternoon, Jessa withdrew a folder from her tote. It was cream thick, the kind offices buy when they want to reassure. She set it on the rolling table that swung over the bed and placed a pen on top with a small, deliberate click. Paperwork, she said. Routine authorizations so we can take care of things. The hospital wants to know who to call, how to coordinate. It's tedious. Sign and we'll get out of your hair. I slid the table closer. The pen was heavy in a way meant to impress. She uncapped it for me, preemptive courtesy. The first page wore a confident title, Durable Power of Attorney. Beneath it, a paragraph in a lawyer's idea of English. Farther down, a cluster of small boxes one could fill to grant or deny. Another page waited beneath, and under that, another. Words gathered into grammatical little armies assign, execute, convey. On the fourth sheet, a familiar word dressed up for a formal event, quit claim. My pulse made the monitor throw a soft tantrum. The room noticed, the room pretended it hadn't. Do I sign all of them, I asked. Yes, Jessa said, quick as a reflex. They keep your file organized. Let me read, I said. Of course, she replied as if permission were her talent. They're standard. Adam rubbed his eyebrow with the edge of a knuckle. Babe, he said softly to Jessa, which was the sound people make right before they say nothing of consequence. He glanced toward the rain chalking the window. They said to have it back by the end of visiting hours. Jessa nodded as if he had confirmed a weather report. It's easier if we do it now. I tried to position my glasses with the tape at the bridge that makes me look more fragile than I am. The letters swam. The hydrangeas at the sink bobbed slightly in their paper as if affected by my breathing. "I'm thirsty," I said to the room, which was the same as saying it to Jessa. She reached for the plastic pitcher, poured carefully, guided the straw as if training it to approach. While the cup was near my mouth, I slid the top page the smallest fraction with a crooked finger. The words I needed were hiding in the middle where paragraphs go to be invisible authority, includes without limitation. Real property, deeds, banking, irrevocable, unless. Language that pretends to be furniture and is actually a door. I set the cup down. The condensation left a ring like a moon on the table. Jessa wiped it without looking, a reflex of order. "The nurse will be in," Adam said, checking a watch that hadn't been adjusted since daylight savings. "Maybe we should take our time," Jessa said brightly, which meant the opposite. My hand hovered. The pen waited like a small, eager animal. I could feel the bed under me, not as furniture, but as a kind of argument. "I'm tired," I said finally. I read slowly when I'm tired. "Let's not make a mess of anything." "It's simple," Jessa said. "You trust us. We'll handle the dull parts." I blew gently on the ink I had not yet laid down. "I'll sign after dinner," I said. It sounded ordinary, like a choice about dessert. "Visiting hours end before then," she said. "We'll miss the window." "Then we'll do it in the morning," I said, as if I were discussing weather. Something not large, not dramatic changed in her face. A tiny flicker, like a thought stepping on a nail. She pressed her lips together to shape a new smile. "If it makes you comfortable," she said, and the words came out glazed. Adam watched the rain. It thickened, and he nodded to it as if in conversation. He did not meet my eyes. I couldn't tell if that was an omission or a strategy. The nurse entered, a swish of blue and the smell of sanitizer that manages somehow to be soothing. She checked my line, my numbers, my name. "How are we doing, Miriam?" "We're upright," I said. "Good enough," she murmured, resetting the clip on my finger. The monitor cheered up. Jessa gathered the folder with a soft, convincing sound, as if even paper could be coaxed into compliance. She laid the pen on top, capped aligned with the seam. "We'll bring it back," she said, like an invitation that assumes it has already been accepted. They left the hydrangeas. Their blue held its breath in the fluorescent light. When the elevator chimed down the hall, the room became its own country again. Rain worked at the window, persistent without drama. I lifted the pitcher, filled the cup myself, learned the weight of it in my hand. The refrigerator in Mrs. Finch's hallway hummed on a long, steady note, here, not there, that threaded the evening. I lay back and watched the ceiling's tiny holes become a figure that did not exist, then become nothing. The printer at the nurse's station grumbled. A cart squeaked and then remembered how to be quiet. The curtain breathed when the air vent found it. I rested my hand where the pen had been and felt the table's seam under my skin. The skin remembers. It learns the difference between pressure and permission. I breathed until the monitor matched me instead of the other way around. The hydrangeas did not move. The rain did what rain does. The day ended without consultation. I turned my face toward the window and let the glass hold the shape of it. My name was on the chart at the foot of the bed. Black letters on a white strip, indisputable as a door. I closed my eyes and kept hold of that which was enough for the 1 hour that followed, and then the next. At night, the hospital dimmed by degrees as if the building were a creature learning to breathe while it slept. The blue-scarfed nurse, she told me her name was Nadine, when she tucked a warm blanket at my side, lowered the blinds to half-mast, and clicked the monitor to a kinder brightness. Outside rain negotiated with the eaves. Inside, the hydrangeas kept their posture. "Anything else?" she asked. "My bag," I said, "the canvas one in the cupboard." She set it on my lap, then angled the overbed light so it drew a circle large enough for my hands. At the bottom of the bag was a manila envelope. I had slipped it there months ago, after a night of poor sleep, when a thought refused to be argued with. The envelope had my handwriting on the flap. Old habits label themselves, even when you don't own a machine for it. I slid out a thin stack, a copy of the deed from the year we refinanced. A notarized addendum the lawyer had once called belt and suspenders, and I had called insurance. 2 receipts from Hackett Lumber from when the porch sagged and I would not let it. The addendum wore its language like a winter coat. Life estate in favor of Miriam Cole for the duration of her natural life with full rights of occupancy and enjoyment. The phrase enjoyment struck me as a joke the law hadn't meant to make. I traced the notary's embossed seal with the rim of a fingernail. Even flat paper has a topography. Nadine stood without moving the air. "Do you want me to read?" she asked. "I want to keep this somewhere. It can't be mislaid by accident," I said. "Could you take pictures?" "Email them to me. I have an address I don't use for much." She nodded, practical where kindness and competence meet. "I'll use my work phone. I'll send them to you and to myself and then delete them from the device. Belt and suspenders, she added to let me know she had heard me without being told. We worked like conspirators and like clerks, page click check the image repeat. She angled the lamp so the seal rose from the shadow. When she finished, she tapped an address into her phone twice once, in the to line again in the subject so I could read it if I needed to copy it later. She wrote my temporary password on the back of a hospital menu and folded it into my palm. You'll change it, she said, when you feel like wrestling with a portal. She slid the papers back into the envelope and the envelope back into my bag. Anything else, she asked again, which really meant, do you need me to stay? I'm all right, I said, and for the span of that sentence I was. The next morning brought the sort of light that hospital walls pretend is mercy. Rounds, vitals, a tray with a lid that lifted to reveal eggs arranged to look like compliance. Jessa arrived with the coffee she set where I couldn't reach it in the same folder as before. Adam hovered behind her jaw at careful ease. The hydrangeas were beginning to seethe, a smell that announces itself and then can't remember why it came. We'll keep it simple, Jessa said, drawing the folder toward me like a dealer smoothing a deck. We didn't want to push you yesterday. You did, I said mildly. You were simply polite about it. Her smile adjusted, then held. Let's not make this adversarial. I'm reading, I said, and laid my hand over the cream cover as one does to bless bread or steady a small ship. She waited, but the waiting had a timer baked into it. Adam checked a message. I opened to the page with the verbs that move money from one name to another, and the page after that, where names learn to behave as if they were furniture. A nurse's cart squeaked in the hallway. Stop, apologize, proceed. The monitor kept my pulse honest. I'll have a copy, I said, of everything I sign. Of course, she said. And the unsigned pages will leave with you. That's how paper operates, she replied, enjoying her knowledge of office weather. Adam stepped in to be gentle. Mom. Miriam, this just makes it easier for us to help. When you're recovering, that's all. I pressed the top of the pen with my thumb until it did that soft click that feels like agreement. Then I set the pen down. I'll do this after the doctor comes, I said. If he thinks pain medication might make a signature look drunk, I'd rather wait. That's not how morphine works, Jessa said too quickly. I know how my hand works, I said. I prefer it steady. They traded a glance. The glance had practiced itself. We'll step out, Adam said, and kissed the air near my temple as if his lips were a weather icon forecasting warmth. When they left the room grew a spine. The hydrangeas stood at attention. Nadine passed by the door and gave me a look that meant you have what you need. I slid the folder back toward my chest, an object that could be here without happening to me. By afternoon, the discharge discussion began, dates like birds that might land or might veer away. Mrs. Finch had texted the nurse's station to say the spare room was open and to ask whether I preferred the side with the window or the side with the plug. Window, I told them. I'd like to see my house. The ride back to Harborview stitched the hospital to the neighborhood as neatly as the driver could manage. Mrs. Finch had placed a glass of something pale on the bedside table and a folded towel across the foot of the bed the way inns used to mean it. She had also set a small ceramic dish on the dresser, the kind meant for earrings painted with a thyme sprig. People listen even when they aren't asked to. I baked a pan of lasagna, she said. We can bleach the pan together so Jessa doesn't give me a look when I hand it back. She wasn't cruel, she was fluent. We made a plan that wasn't a plan she'd be in the kitchen. I'd be in the small chair. Time would pass without announcing itself. From her front window I could see my porch railing like a sentence I had once written, and the gate with its new opinion about who counted. That evening, as the street collected itself, a boy clicking past on a scooter, a dog deciding at last on which patch of lawn was Destiny Mr. Torres, from the corner paused by Mrs. Finch's walkway. Saw a pair of men with clipboards in your yard this morning, he said to me with the friendly nosiness neighborhoods run on, measuring along the fence like they were thinking. One had a camera. He glanced toward my house. Could be city. Could be someone who wants to be city. Thank you, I said. The information entered my body and found a chair. Later, after Mrs. Finch fell asleep in her chair with the television lowering itself into whispers, I opened the manila envelope on the bed and took stock the way you count jars before a winter. The deed, the addendum, the receipts with the cashier's initials where the register had balked and been persuaded. I thought of the things I had once stored in the sewing tin in my closet, hooks, snaps, buttons saved from a coat that came apart at the cuff, thread wound on a scrap of cardboard, like a tiny map. The tin was a bright strawberry once. Sun had taught it rust. In its bottom lay copies of everything that made a house mine besides keys, paid in full stamps, permits, an envelope of photographs of the foundation when it was just a trench waiting to be convinced. I had left the tin where it had always lived beneath a folded sheet that used to be too small for any bed, and therefore perfect for covering boxes. The tin would keep sitting there looking like clutter. Meanwhile, the pages in my hands made a second home inside light. Nadine's email had arrived with each document named as if the future were a filing cabinet. VPN that could be accurate. I logged in on Mrs. Finch's old laptop and saw them lined like soldiers with harmless intentions. The next afternoon, the door opened without a knock you could hear. Jessa's perfume entered first an orchard that had mistaken itself for a courtroom. She stepped into the kitchen as if summoned by the tile. In her hands, a large cream envelope bulged. It had the swollen look of money that has not yet learned humility. "For you," she said, tapping it twice on the table, a gesture that expected a transaction to recognize it. "It's practical for now. Medicines, clothes, whatever you find cumbersome to think about." Mrs. Finch, who had just set a plate of shortbread on the counter, vanished by degrees as hosts do when a private conversation springs up like a weed. The kettle considered boiling, then reconsidered. I looked at the envelope, which smelled like ink, and an idea about how the world should be simpler. For me, I repeated because the grammar of the sentence mattered. "We want you to be comfortable," Jessa said. She stood and in standing made the room look temporary. "No reason to worry about old paperwork. It complicates what doesn't need complication." "Old paperwork," I said. "The kind bound by a notary's seal." She smiled thinly. "Language, Miriam, it's so literal." "Language is often trying," I said. She pushed the envelope an inch closer. "Take it," she said softly. "Please. There's no point holding on to things that make everyone's life harder." Think about Adam. I did think about Adam, his shoulder near the hallway table, his habit of adjusting frames that didn't require it. The boy who once used the chipped blue bowl to build a fort for an army of plums. The man who let sentences be spoken on his behalf. "Did Adam send you?" I asked. "He's working," she said. "I handle logistics." She liked that word. She kept it polished. I remember I said when logistics meant where the coolers would sit at a scout's picnic so the potato salad wouldn't give anyone trouble. I laid my palm on the envelope and felt the smoothness pretend to be generosity. "This buys nothing." "It buys ease," she said. "It buys dignity." "Dignity isn't a purchase," I said. "It's a posture." Her mouth made a line. "You're being ungrateful." "I'm being exact," I said. "You'll need us," she said, and though the words were quiet, they rang the way a lid rings when set too hard on a pot. A little softness makes everything possible. And faster. "Softness is a fabric," I said. "We fold it. It doesn't change the table." The tiniest tremor crossed her wrist. She drew the envelope back as if it had failed its audition. "You'll regret this," she said, the kind of sentence people say when regret is their native tongue. Perhaps I said because time has its own politics, not today. She put the envelope into her bag with a single efficient push. The bag seemed relieved to be believed. She looked at Mrs. Finch's window as if glass could be argued with. "We'll be in touch," she said. When she left the room, exhaled. The kettle decided at last to boil and did so with relief. Mrs. Finch returned with the sugar bowl, then saw my face and traded it for a small dish of lemon slices, the universal sign for people who refuse what the world tells them to drink. She sat. We sat. Steam lifted and unspooled. In the hour after that, the neighborhood conducted itself. A delivery truck sighed. Someone practiced a trumpet badly and honestly. A pair of teenagers laughed in a way that made the air feel like a swing. I carried the manila envelope back to the spare room and set it on the dresser beneath the small dish painted with time. On the wall above the dresser, Mrs. Finch had hung a print of a shoreline stones, a horizon water that looked like deciding. In the glass, I saw my reflection, and beside it the faint outline of the new lock across the lane, reborn by refraction into a mere circle of light. I opened my email on the old laptop and checked that every page was where light could keep it. Then I closed the lid. The small click sounded like a door that knows who it belongs to. Down the hall, the refrigerator hummed its one long note. I lay back on the iron bed and let the sound sow itself through the room until the seams held. The fridge in Mrs. Finch's hallway held its steady note through the night, a seam of sound I could lean my thoughts against. Morning came in like a careful clerk lifting the blinds a rung at a time. My email showed Nadine's scans lined up in patient rows. The manila envelope on the dresser felt heavier because it did not need to be brave alone. By noon, a flyer slipped under the door with the confidence of a creature that knows where it's going. Mrs. Finch retrieved it with a soft scuff of her slipper. Neighborhood Association, she read. Quarterly meeting tonight. Community Hall, 6 o'clock. Open comments. Open, I said, as if testing a hinge. We walked together at dusk, while the streetlights blinked awake one by one. The hall had a varnished smell like a piano that had learned too many songs to forget any of them. Folding chairs scraped a choreography across the floor. A bulletin board near the door carried notices about potlucks and lost mittens in a watercolor class with a patient pair in the example. I wrote my name on the sign-in sheet the way you write on the first page of a book when you're certain it will stay with you. Mr. Torres lifted 2 fingers in greeting. A woman from Pine Street, her name hovering just beyond my grasp, patted the chair next to her. The board sat at a long table with microphones that made every voice sound like a fresher version of itself. The chair Ms. Carter wore a sweater the color of tea and tapped her pen gently before she spoke, bringing the room into one pulse. Announcements came and went. Speed bumps, a fundraiser, a request to keep lids on compost bins unless raccoons were your preferred guests. When she opened the floor, a man asked about pruning the city trees. A woman raised the matter of fireworks and dogs. Then, Ms. Carter said, any other business, and the air arranged itself around the space in front of me, clearing a path I had not rehearsed but recognized. I stood. The chairs made their own small music as people shifted. My name is Miriam Cole, I said. I have lived at 18 Juniper. It surprised me that I did not need to look at the copy of my address in my bag. Some things live nearer to the tongue than names do. I came home from the hospital 3 days ago, I said, and found a new lock on my gate. The house opened, the gate did not. I was told to rest elsewhere because of dust. My son and his wife live there. I set the envelope on the table nearest the front and slid the deed's copy out with its companion, a crisp page that had learned to carry its own weight. Years ago, we refinanced, I said, and I signed an addendum. It grants me a life estate, right of occupancy. It says enjoyment, which is a word the law uses to mean the part that isn't the roof. A ripple of sound moved across the room. The microphones caught none of it. Ms. Carter gestured me nearer. May I? She asked, her fingers already tidy. She studied the notary's seal and the date with the sort of seriousness that isn't theatrical because it doesn't know it's being watched. She passed the page to the man beside her, who put on readers and breathed through his nose. Ms. Cole, she said, thank you for bringing this. It's clear. Behind me, a chair pushed back with a scrape that wanted to be decisive. Jessa stood. She had chosen a white blouse that evening. It turned the light into a kind of shield. We've been renovating, she said. My husband's mother asked to stay with a friend to avoid fumes. The narrative here is dramatic. She smiled a public smile and let the room measure its polish. We're doing our best. I didn't turn. My papers were engaged. I stayed engaged with them. I did not ask to be shut out, I said, speaking to the page and to the microphone and to myself where I could hear it. Adam stood just enough to be counted, then sat. His hands stayed on his knees as if he were pausing in the middle of tying a bowline. Ms. Carter spoke to the room, not the argument. Life estates are not folklore, she said, dry and exact. They're a matter of record. If a resident with life tenancy is prevented from occupying, that's not for the benefit of her lungs. Her pen tapped once on the table. Small thunder. We can't adjudicate disputes, she went on, but we can put facts in our minutes and we can write letters when facts ask to be accompanied. Ms. Cole, if you like, a board member can walk you to your gate tomorrow and stand with you while a locksmith reads this aloud to anyone who doubts literacy. The room let out a collective breath that did not pretend to be neutral. Mr. Torres said, I'll stand, which sounded like an offer and a declaration. The woman from Pine Street nodded in a way that reminded me she had once brought me soup when Adam had strep and I'd been too proud to ask again. Jessa tried again. We're a family, she said, emphasizing the word as if it were a permission slip. Public shaming doesn't help anyone. I brought copies, I said. I held the other pages, the Hackett lumber receipts, the inspection sign-off, a photo of the foundation trench with my handwriting on the back, naming the year. There is a way to set paper down so it does not feel like an argument. I used that way, and the paper agreed. Ms. Carter slid everything into a neat stack and capped her pen. We'll issue a letter tonight, she said, because the printer works better before the machine decides it's owed a vacation. Ms. Cole, someone will walk you home if you wish. I'm in the spare room, I said, across the lane. Then we'll walk you across the lane, she said. We did not march. We dispersed into the evening the way gatherings do, all at once and gradually. On the sidewalk, people spoke in pairs. Someone held a door for someone else. The door said thank you in the language of hinges. I went with Mrs. Finch and Mr. Torres between them like a piece of furniture worth carrying. At the gate, the new lock wore the last of the daylight. It wasn't glowing. It simply declined to be anything but itself. Tomorrow, Mr. Torres said. 10, I said. Sleep came like a useful visitor and stayed. Morning had that washed, clean smell Harborview keeps in reserve for days when something is going to stay put. At 9:58, Mr. Torres stood at the foot of Mrs. Finch's walkway with a thermos and a smile that didn't announce itself. At 10, Ms. Carter arrived with a man in a navy jacket, whose toolbox had a sense of humor about its dents. I'm licensed, he said, showing me a card as if showing a passport. I can read loudly if needed. We crossed. The shell chime gave its small verdict. I pressed the buzzer with the accuracy of ritual. Footsteps, the pause, the click. Jessa behind the screen again, white blouse, softer, now hair, already past its first plan of the day. Her eyes took in the companions as if we were an uninvited wedding party that had chosen Tuesday by mistake. We're here to resolve an error. Ms. Carter said, pleasant as weather. She handed over the board's letter, a single-page official in the way things are when ink decides to be confident. Ms. Cole retains life tenancy, she said. The lock prevents occupancy. That's the sentence we have. A locksmith can remedy hardware, the board can remedy minutes. Choose which you prefer to argue with. Jessa's mouth opened, then changed its mind. Adam appeared behind her like a late thought. He looked at the paper, at me, at the keyhole we were all pretending had a vote. You can keep your gate, I said to no one in particular. I'm asking the house to remember me. The door is the right place for that. Jessa stepped back. Adam reached for the chain on the screen, unhooked it without drama, and opened the inner door. The smell of the hallway came out to meet me. The table wax, the faint lemon above it all, a whisper of paint that had already learned to belong. I did not step in. The lock could be changed in a measure of minutes. The inside of a room takes longer. Thank you, I said, and meant the thanks for the part of this that was about doors, not people. Ms. Carter nodded to the locksmith, who knelt and made a brief, exact music with his tools. The cylinder learned a new trick and offered me a plain metal key stamped with a number like a secret that hadn't yet decided to be one. That's yours, he said. I set the key in my palm the way you set a bead on thread. I looked past the hallway table to the runner I had hemmed one hot afternoon. The stitches held, they don't know how not to. By noon, the house had agreed to stop being a closed mouth. I stepped onto the porch and sat on the top stair. I could have stayed there until the rain came. I could have stood. I could have done any number of things that would have added up to nothing more than being where I belonged. Instead, I pressed the key into the small ceramic dish on Mrs. Finch's dresser later and listened to its particular sound against glaze. Keeping is not always carrying. After lunch, I took the bus downtown. The station smelled like pennies and coffee and the pages of the free newspaper stacked in a leaning tower. In the office building, a young man at a wide desk asked my name twice so he could spell it right once. He ushered me into a room with a window that made the river look employed. The woman who met me wore a navy dress and a wristwatch that kept its promises. What would you like to accomplish, she asked, and it was a good question for a day. I'd like my will rewritten, I said. I want the house at 18 Juniper to go to Harborview Senior Aid when I'm finished with it. The word finished behaved itself without my help. She didn't blink. All right, her pen began its tidy work. We'll need witnesses. We'll notarize. Do you have the prior version with you? I did. We arranged the old paper on the desk, the way you set out ingredients when you already know the recipe. She read. I read. She pointed where pointing mattered. When it came time to sign, my hand did what it has always known how to do. The notary's stamp sank into the page and rose with its impression weight and relief at once. Copy, she asked. Yes, I said. She slid them into a folder and gave it to me the way you hand someone a loaf you've baked yourself. I placed it in my bag and felt the strap take on the new purpose without complaint. Outside, the river threw light back at the traffic. A gull argued with a current in one. I walked to the senior center because the day still had room. On the gravel behind the building, the volunteers had made a small fence of twine around a rectangle of earth where tomatoes considered blushing. I filled a green plastic watering can and took my time. The water stitched dark into the soil and the smell rose the way certain songs rise before you know where you've heard them. I had finished the second row when the air shifted the way air does when someone brings perfume to it. Jessa and Adam stood at the gate, dressed as if they had an appointment with a camera. His tie was slack, her lipstick held a line that specialized in certainty. We need to talk, Adam said, and his voice sounded older than he looked. I set the can down and wiped my hands on my skirt. We're here, I said. Say what you came for. Jessa spoke first. You signed something today, she said. You know how that looks. It looks signed, I said. To strangers, she said. To a fund. As if we don't exist. You do, I said, standing there. Legacy matters, Adam said. He had brought the word the way you bring a bottle to a dinner. That house is where I scrubbed the floor and hemmed the runner and kept soup warm until you came home from your paper route, I said. It knows who built it. Legacy can live elsewhere without becoming smaller. Jessa folded her arms as if the air needed bracing. People will talk. They have always done that, I said. Less interesting than it promises to be. You'll need help, she tried again, and I saw in her face the fatigue of someone who is best at the kind of caring that shows in a spreadsheet. I have it, I said, from people who knock. Adam looked at the watering can as if it were the exact size of the thing he could carry. He didn't reach for it. I didn't mean for this to be, he stopped. Language, when it refuses to perform, is its own kind of honesty. I know, I said. I watched a swallow dive and change its mind twice before settling on a line of air that held. Jessa straightened. This is done then, she said, pronouncing the period with her chin. It is, I said. They left the way people leave when they remember they have other places to be. The gate closed behind them with a sound that came from its hardware, not from me. The volunteers on the far side of the beds resumed their talk about mulch as if the conversation were a radio they'd turn up after a weather report. I lifted the can and finished the last row. The tomatoes did not pretend to understand. They pretended to be tomatoes and succeeded. Evening returned the lane to itself. From Mrs. Finch's window, the porch light across the way threw its soft oval on the step. The shell chime counted the breeze. I set the new key in its dish and left it there. My cane leaned in the corner like a sentence that doesn't need an exclamation point. The fridge found its note and held it. The house with its lock, now merely a circle of useful metal, remembered me exactly as much as I remembered it, which was plenty. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.